Thank you, Art. We were very pleased that the DDP would choose to have their 1996 meeting in Utah. They gave us the privilege of finding the location and the facility. You might be interested to know that we chose this hotel for all of three reasons. First of all, it's very close to the airport and very convenient. Second, it's a very nice hotel. And third, it's at ground zero in a nuclear target. And we thought maybe you'd all sit up and take notice while we're talking about weapons effects and survival skills and shelter building, and hope that you would be more appreciative of it. When we started building shelters, we considered building of many different materials. We considered concrete, fiberglass, wood, old tires, but we found that the corrugated steel and the steel plate were by far the least expensive and the most easily constructed. People who have rudimentary metal and wood building skills can put these shelters together and have them buried and ready to go for around $10,000 for an 8-foot diameter by a 50-foot length, or maybe $12,000 for a 9-foot diameter. And we're doing this continually. We've done a number of them again this year, and they're very easily constructed. The basic shelter concepts were designed by engineers from FEMA and from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The blast doors and blast valves were designed by local engineers from our Civil Defense Volunteers group, and you may have seen our blast door that's out in the hall. This is one of the last ones that we've had designed, and we think it's very good, and we hope you'll take time to look at that. Did we wheel it in?
No.
And we know of no shelter designs commercially or from any place else that have been tested under blast conditions. However, the basic design using this steel was tested during the nuclear weapons tests in Nevada. The concept was highly recommended by government engineers, but very few people were privy to the information, and we're very grateful to Crescent Kearney and Ed York and to Conrad Chester for their guidance in developing this basic design. We felt in worst case scenario that our general populations might have in the cities as much as a 1 megaton yield weapon against them, and so we have based our shelter design around that 1 megaton yield. The basic nuclear effects we're concerned about are thermal, EMP, blast, and radiation, and I'm going to take just a few minutes to just quickly remind you a little bit about these weapons effects. Now is that in? Okay. Within less than a millionth of a second of the detonation, large amounts of energy in the form of invisible X-rays and gamma rays are absorbed within just a few feet of the atmosphere. This leads to the formation of an extremely hot and luminous mass called a fireball. If we were standing 50 miles away, it would appear to us more bright than the noonday sun. The heat from the fireball is radiated in the form of thermal radiation. The pulse travels at the speed of light, and it lasts for a fraction of a second up to several seconds. If we were far enough away from the blast and could drop and cover quickly, we could maybe protect ourselves from some of these burns that would occur. At 8 miles from the detonation, although there's just minimal structural damage, we could receive burns that would be critical to us. And so you can see at the 10 to 12 mile zone, you would have first degree burns. Now, a full body first degree burn is something to deal with in a nuclear war. 8 to 10 miles, you're going to have full body second degree burns. So you must drop, at least drop and cover, but more important than that, get behind large objects or underground. Is Dr. Looney here? Let's see. Who was it I was going to borrow glasses from? These glasses are just horrible. I'm so well prepared. I wanted little ones. Maybe I can borrow. No, I can borrow Paul's. Paul's got. That's how well prepared. I can't see you if I'm looking through my glasses. If there were an escalating crisis, we could enter the shelters and wait. But it is more probable that we're not going to have an escalating crisis. Well, those are as big as mine. Thank you anyway. I need little little flat ones.
Try those.
Let's see. This is probably not strong enough. That's better. Thank you very much. So, so then, what would we do if we didn't have an escalating crisis? Well, we'd have to have some kind of early warning system. And the only early warning system that we can come up with is from the electromagnetic pulse. Now, we're not going to get a warning from a siren, from the radio, from any place else if that nuclear weapon is on its way. We've talked to a number of strategists who believe that a nuclear war would be initiated with a high altitude, maybe 1 megaton yield weapon, 200 miles high. They believe that this weapon would probably come by way of satellite, that we wouldn't even know it was here until it had been exploded. And as this explodes, the gamma rays and X-rays come down from the weapon and interact with the pancake layer of atmosphere that's between 12.5 and 25 miles high. They knock the electrons off the atoms, and this goes spinning down through the Earth's magnetic lines, of course, in the Compton electron effect. And this builds up huge voltages in the collectors, as much as 60,000 volts per meter. And this EMP, if detonated over the center of the country, could affect an area of 1,000 miles diameter, and they would probably detonate several of these weapons. Now, this is kind of deductive reasoning, but what we have come up with is that at the very moment of this detonation, our commercial power will fail. Now, there are a lot of other things that will fail. The reason they detonate this weapon is that it's going to destroy a lot of our solid-state electronics. Our satellites would be affected, and some of our navigational, communication, computers, all kinds of equipment would be affected by this. And so when the power fails, then at that very moment, they would be launching their ICBMs. Now, if we have a power failure, then we have in Utah 25 minutes to maybe between 8 and 30 minutes anyway before an ICBM missile would reach us here in Utah. Now, the submarine-launched ballistic missiles could be considerably shorter. The ICBMs may be 25 minutes. So the power fails right now. What are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is have to decide whether this is an EMP or whether it's just a regular old lightning strike or just a run-of-the-mill power failure. So the first thing I would do would be to go to the radio or to the telephone. If the telephone isn't working, I'm a little more concerned because normally the telephone does not go out when we have a power failure. Then I would go to my battery-powered radio. Only 5% of the radio stations have been hardened against the effects of EMP. So we would have many, many radio stations that would not be transmitting. You didn't bring your battery-powered radio? I'll bet you do next year. So you could go out to a car, turn on a battery-powered radio. And then you would run out and get in your car and go south as fast as you could go. And if you could get 25 miles in 25 minutes, you would be beyond the weapons effects from this particular detonation and out south 25 miles of here. From what I have seen from the computer programs they give us from FEMA, that we would have about a 1 psi overpressure and our cars would survive the blast. And then you would just keep going south until you ran out of gas or found a friendly town, or those of you who went on our shelter tour, you could stop at one of the shelters. Paul, you'd let them do that, wouldn't you?
Oh, sure.
You could all go to Paul's house.
Only if they're paid up members of DDP.
Right. Okay. So you wonder, well, what would we do if we were asleep? And of course, if this did come from Russia, and then they are very capable, at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's early afternoon in Russia, this would be a very likely scenario. They would want to do this while we were at our least prepared. And so we have made a little power drop alarm. We call it an EMP alarm. Did we bring it in? Oh, okay. And when the power drops, now that happens not too regularly at our house. We have to scrape my husband off the ceiling. He's down there with claws like a cat. And it's a little frightening, but we get up and do what we have to do. And this is very simple. The schematics are in the book. We do have a little book, Civil Defense Volunteers. We have written the book on weapons effects and building the shelter. And it's nothing more than this particular one, a motorcycle battery, a motorcycle horn, a relay switch, a flasher unit. When the power drops, the battery sounds the horn. So we believe that every instance of power failure should be a suspected EMP, and we check everyone out. A 1 megaton sized weapon is equivalent to approximately 1 million tons of TNT. In just 10 seconds, that fireball has increased to a mile, and the shock blast wave has moved outward about 3 miles. The wave of air causes a huge buildup of pressure. Normal air pressure at sea level is 14.7 pounds per square inch, and as this wave bounces off the ground, it becomes very huge. The human body can withstand 35 to 40 psi, surprisingly. This is the threshold for 5% lethality. All kinds of terrible biological effects occur at this level. As the air is moved inward, the abdominal and thoracic region it hemorrhages and ruptures. Lungs are damaged from hemorrhage and edema. Air is forced into the arteries and into the veins and into the heart and arterial system. All kinds of awful things happen. Along with the physical and collateral damage caused by these high overpressures is an accompanying effect called the dynamic effect. It's a wind. At 35 psi, we have a 670 mile per hour wind. At 5 psi, we have a 165 mile per hour wind. At 5 psi, which is approximately 5 miles from the blast, we could possibly survive in our basements, but our homes would be blown down. I'm going to have Paul tell you a little bit about the significance of this in our shelter construction. I'm sorry?
You were talking about getting in the automobile and driving 25 minutes to get 25 miles south.
Uh-huh.
When they've done the EMP simulations back east, all the cars with electronic ignition won't start.
That's, you guys all drive new cars. We drive old cars. That's very possible. Our computerized ignitions might be affected. However, there are many people that believe they won't. Maybe some will, maybe some won't. This is a very big concern to us. And as we teach our classes in Civil Defense Volunteers, we teach about expedient sheltering. Where would we go if this happened right this moment? Well, we're looking for basements. We're looking for culverts. We're looking for tunnels. We have wonderful pipe chases in our universities, and we get down into those, and I go through them all the time, find my place. And in our hospitals, we have tunnels sometimes that go from room to room. But it is very possible, and we just don't know. I don't know that it's classified, or we just don't know it. I would sure like to know if that's true. But I guess we won't know until it happens. Thanks for your question.
Can I have my glasses back?
Oh.
We share almost everything. When we say that a person could survive up to 40 psi overpressure, basically that is overpressure exclusively. That is, you're not, if you were standing outside in the 35 or 40 psi zone, you would suffer other direct weapons effects such as thermal burns, and you would be blown quite a ways down the street. So when we say 40 psi, we really mean in a circumstance where you would not be exposed to any other weapons effects, such as being in a shelter with all the blast doors open and all the blast valves open. So that's just overpressure only. To compensate for these high blast overpressures, we bury the shelters at least twice their body diameter. And if you follow that general formula, it's pretty hard to go wrong when you're constructing a shelter. The minimum rule of thumb that we use on top cover is at least 3 feet. 4 is better. But if you're going to be in a blast area where you might be subjected to prompt neutrons, we recommend at least 7 feet to give adequate shielding there. We also recommend that you cover the shelter completely with 1/2 inch minus crushed rock. If you insist on the washed crushed rock, not engineer's fill, not pea gravel, but crushed rock, you won't have any problems with hull deformation or any settling problems, and the stuff just flows right into all the cracks and crevices really well. You don't have to do any tamping or manipulating of the fill. It just flows right under the shelter. We also recommend a minimum body diameter or hull diameter of 8 feet. If you can go a 9 or a 10 foot diameter shelter, that's even better. We have constructed some 10-foot diameter shelters in the area lately, and when you get inside them, you have a great feeling of openness, and it's very comfortable to be in. But certainly the 8-foot diameter hulls work just fine. Now, if you're using 12-gauge corrugated steel pipe, culvert pipe, we are recommending at least a 1/4 inch minimum thickness on the bulkhead, and 3/8 of an inch would be even better. We have used as thin as 10-gauge steel on the bulkheads and haven't had any failures, but Ed York has indicated that perhaps a 1/4 inch to a 3/8 of an inch plate on the end would be better. And make sure that when you have the fabricator weld this plate on the end, that the end plate protrudes at least a 1/2 inch beyond the outside diameter of the hull. That way you get a stronger weld, and under blast loading the bulkhead will push in a little bit, and it will kind of roll the edge of the end of the shelter in, but it should hold under blast conditions. In some areas where you have very porous soil and a lot of rainfall, we recommend that you lay down a moisture barrier maybe a foot or so beneath the top layer of soil, so that it would divert rainwater away from the shelter and avoid any leakage problems. In areas where we have a high water table, and in this area we do have a problem to some extent with that, the only alternative with a steel shelter is to dig down where you find a permanent the water table level, and set the shelter in place there, and then you're going to have to berm your shielding material up over the top. And if that is the only alternative, I hope you have a big yard, because if you have a very small yard, it's going to look rather odd. But in the wintertime, you'll have lots of neighbor children that find it very attractive to ski down the top of your shelter. But anyway, keeping in mind as you're berming, or you're placing your berm, to avoid any angles greater than 30 degrees, because angles steeper than 30 degrees sets up a problem with reflected overpressure and could reduce your blast protection. The first shelter we installed was Sharon's, and we've learned a lot since we've made her shelter. But oddly, the first shelter we built, we did some things right that we should have continued to do, and one of those was placing railroad ties over the ends of the bulkheads. It costs a little bit more, but we've noticed that there's absolutely no bulging of the bulkhead. It adds a great deal of strength to the end cap on the shelter. And I had to do some work down there this last month and relocating some equipment, and I noticed that when we cut a small hole in the bulkhead, that there was still no moisture or earth material touching the outer wall of the shelter. So you gain strength, and you also get some advantage there with preventing corrosion on the end cap of your shelter. In a few shelters, we've installed the bulkheads without the railroad ties. We have noticed some bulging on the bulkhead, but as I said before, we haven't had any failures, and they haven't given us any problems. Now, the blast doors that we recommend are fabricated with a skin thickness of at least 3/8 of an inch hot rolled steel. If you can afford it, there are other more exotic materials out there, such as stainless steel, but the cost goes up enormously when you use these exotic materials. However, some individuals have been concerned about vandalism or theft, and so they've gone ahead and gone with the stainless plate, because you can't cut stainless steel with a torch. But I've been very happy with the 3/8 hot rolled steel. One of my favorite pastimes whenever I get a chance is to sit and talk with Ed York about direct weapons effects. And he was telling one of his great stories in this area, and he happened to mention, well, let me back up just a minute. Being aware that these shelters will withstand up to 200 pounds per square inch in overpressure, we got to studying in our literature and determined that these shelters will survive quite a ways inside the fireball. If it's a ground burst, you're going to have a fireball about 2 miles in diameter. So we got to thinking, gee, if we're going to be inside the fireball, maybe we ought to find out more about what actually goes on in there. So we were picking away at Ed York's mind, and he happened to casually mention that inside the fireball, they experience about 2 inches of boil-off of this top layer of steel on any structures that are above ground. And I just happen to remember that my door is only 3/8 of an inch thick. So this was kind of a significant revelation to me. So I had to stop it. Ed, stop, back up. Let's go back to that 2 inches of steel boil-off here for a minute. And he explained to me that it was a matter of simply putting in a ablative layer of material on the door to keep the heat away from the door until the fireball lifts, which should be in 2 to 3 seconds. It'll start lifting off the ground. And so, not working for General Dynamics or General Electric or any one of those large companies, I started thinking, how in the world am I going to get my hands on, these exotic ablative materials? And Ed said, well, if you just use, 3/4 inch or a 1 inch layer of plywood and securely fasten that to the door, the plywood works just fine. The Soviets having used plywood for a shielding material on their first generation of nuclear reentry vehicles on their missiles. So that's one other level of protection you can add to your door if you feel the need to do so. In order to sustain life, according to Department of the Navy tests and shelter occupancy tests, it's been determined that you need at least 3 cubic feet of air per minute per person. In a hot environment or at maximum occupancy, or both, you may need up to 10 times this amount of air to maintain comfort and avoid medical problems with some of the people you may have in your shelter. I noticed during the shelter tour we had approximately 20 people in my shelter, which is an 8 by 32 foot shelter, and I noted the temperature when we entered, which was about 60 degrees, and in about 15 minutes the temperature had increased by 4 degrees. So ventilation is very important if you're going to be able to control the heat inside your shelter. For your heat or your air vents, we recommend a minimum of 6-inch diameter steel pipe. Steel pipe runs about $6 a foot. It's about twice as expensive as PVC, and I never cease to be amazed at how many individuals want to use PVC pipe for their airways. And I refer them to the American Cancer Society advertisement, where they say if you can't breathe, nothing else really matters. And so they, I usually succeed in talking them into going to steel pipe. We also like to remind people not to use any kerosene or white gas stoves to cook in their shelters. The alcohol stoves appear to be fine. They don't give off any amounts of carbon monoxide, and alcohol seems to be much more user-friendly as far as handling the fuel and so forth if you must cook in a shelter. If you have an adequate power supply, a microwave oven is much better and much safer. The first shelters we built had above ground ventilation pipes. That is, the pipes came out of a concrete collar in the ground and had a 180-degree gooseneck and with a big bell on it, and these work okay, except of course later, after we built several of these, we've learned that these pipes will only withstand about 20 pounds per square inch overpressure, and they'll be sheared off at ground level, which would still leave you an air pipe, but you would have diminished efficiency at removing fallout particles that may be in the air. So we have gone to recommending the rock crib blast valve, and as you can see, it's fairly simple. I think we just had that up there, didn't we? Okay. Basically, it consists of a pit, at least 4 feet in diameter, which would be filled with large rocks between 3 and 5 inch diameter, and your air pipe with the downward bell would be inside near the bottom. It's also crucial that you not put a bottom in this so that the rainwater can run on through to the bottom and drain out. You don't want to have a water problem from your blast valve. We did have one gentleman who installed a shelter and didn't have his rock crib quite done yet, and they irrigated the field. And the water ran down into the rock crib and put about 1,200 gallons of water in a shelter. And so we learned from that too. Another advantage of the rock crib system, aside from protecting your air inlet from blast damage, is the fact that it will attenuate approximately 20 pounds per square inch overpressure. So you get basically a pre-blast valve before your in-shelter valve has to take over and reduce the overpressure even further. For ventilation, we've selected the 12 volt or 24 volt direct current coaxial fan, which is commonly used for cooling electronics cabinets. They're widely available at electronics supply houses. If you have any trouble getting a hold of one of these fans, please feel free to call us and we can refer you to a good supplier. The fan basically puts out 240 cubic feet a minute in free air, that is with no resistance working against it. And they sell for about $60 each, new. Now you may be able to find one at another source, and if you can, that's great. Sometimes you can find them at a surplus sale for $5. But we recommend the 6-inch fan because it does move the most air, and it only consumes about at 1 amp hour at 12 volts. This would enable you to run on your batteries for quite a long time, and so we are very satisfied with this type of fan. The type of fan that you see in the school buses, and I have one example over here in the box, has a big wire cage around it. You see them used for defrosting school bus windshields. Those are absolutely not adequate for shelter ventilation because they will not move air through any kind of a restricted space such as an air pipe. So stay away from those. You have the overlay on the blast valve? This is the blast valve that I built initially for several shelters in the area. I had some help from an engineer who works where I do, who had a lot of experience on the Atlas missile program, and he knew what basically I was looking for in a blast valve. And Ed York has looked at this design and calculated that it would probably withstand 200 pounds per square inch one time, and would withstand 50 pounds per square inch exposure several times. So I hope I never have to test mine, and I would like to say up front that we've never actually tested this in a shock tunnel, but I feel confident that it would be serviceable. For that very reason, the fact that we haven't tested it in a shock tunnel, I'm recommending that if you have the funding, to go ahead and buy the Lua blast valve and ventilation system because it's very well engineered. It's been tested extensively, and we feel that it's by far the best valve and air pump system available in the world. Sharon's going to talk a little bit about radiation.
Radiation is the most far-reaching of any of the weapon's effects. If the fireball of the weapon touches the ground, the blast is defined as a ground burst. In a ground burst, rock and debris and other material in the area are sucked up into the fireball, and there they are uniformly fused with the fission products. All of this debris then falls down out of the fireball and becomes literally fallout. It's been estimated that between 1/2 and 1 times the yield of the weapon is picked up from the ground and taken into the cloud. So in a 1 megaton weapon, between 500,000 tons and 1 million tons of debris will be picked up into that cloud. Gamma radiation is a great threat for the first 2 weeks, and I think all of you understand the alphas and the betas and gammas. Gamma is quite penetrating, and after 2-week period, we don't have enough of that left that it causes too much of a problem. Every year we get about 1/3 of a Roentgen. In a nuclear war time, we might get several thousand Roentgen in an hour. So this is quite a difference. Now, you see on this chart, with the protection factor of 5, we're getting 1,200 to 3,000 rads in a 2-week period. Now, protection factor of 5 means you're getting 1/5 of the radiation inside that you have outside. So if you have 1,000 rads outside, then you're having just 200 rads inside. But over a 2-week period, a protection factor of 5 gives you this amount. Now, you might have a protection factor of 5 in your living room. Your roof of your home would cover your main floor with about that much of protection. In your basement, you might have as much as a protection factor of 10. So you see in high fallout risk areas, you might be getting 600 to 1,500 Roentgens. And in a medium fallout risk area, you would get 600 to 1,200 in a protection factor of 5, and low, you would get 600 rads or less. Well, let's look at I'm sure you're all aware of what the penalty chart will tell you. In a 1-week period, if you get 150, then you don't have too much problem. You get 250, some need medical care, and you get 450, you'll get 50% deaths. So you can see again, kind of keep that 450 and 600 rad level in mind, because 600 is normally lethal. Now look back on our chart. With a protection factor of 5, even in low fallout areas, we would expect most everyone to die if you stayed in your living room and didn't go out. So we want to make sure that you go someplace else and get more shielding, because to fight radiation, we have to have time, distance, and shielding. So every 4 inches of soil will approximately attenuate half of the radiation. You'd have a protection factor of 2. So if you go into your basement, and now look now for just a moment at Utah. I've done Utah. We see most of the areas of low radiation, a few of medium, and a few of high. We have Morgan as high, and we have Logan, I think, as high, because of the targets that are west. And the normal winds would go from west to east. And so if you're in those high radiation areas and you're from Utah, you might want to take notice of this. But if you go to your basement now, and let's say you're in a medium radiation zone, which is Salt Lake. You go to your basement, and you have a protection factor of 10, so now you've got 300 rads. If you have a protection factor of 20, that means that you have cut that 10 in half. You've put 4 inches of soil over the top. So then you have 150. And if you put another 400, you have 100 rads. And then you're not significantly in trouble. So keep in mind that shielding is very important. In our shelters, we have 8 feet of soil, 6 and 8 feet of soil overhead. We have protection factors in the millions with that. Radiation decays very quickly, at least these beta radiations. During the fission process in a nuclear detonation, many isotopes with different decay patterns are produced. It's been found that averaging all of these decay patterns exponentially, it comes out to be a rule we call the 7-10 rule. That means that every increase with a factor of 7, you get a decrease with a factor of 10. And so if you have 1,000 rads per hour, then in 7 hours you will only have 100 rads per hour. And in 7 times 7 hours, which is approximately 2 days, you would have 10 rads per hour. And in 7 times 2 days, which is approximately 2 weeks, you have 1 rad per hour. And we can tolerate that. But in medium radiation zones, you're probably not going to start with 1,000 rads per hour. But it does decay quite quickly. Of course, we're left with alphas and betas, and that's another story because it doesn't have a lot to do with our shelters. Our shelter door will keep out the alphas and the betas. Now, the entrances will allow some radiation to enter. Radiation levels drop with the distance from the fallout. And it's recommended that there always be 2 entrances. We run the entrances down and vertically to a 90-degree turn, and then we turn horizontally and go 7 or 8 feet and breach the radius of the shelter at the end. And as we've talked to Ed York, he recommends that the sum of these two legs, the vertical and the horizontal, be no less than 22 feet. The vertical and horizontal portion of the entrance tube should be welded into the 90-degree angle by the fabricator, and this is done, we have Amcor do this for us. Initial radiation occurs within 1.5 miles of the blast, and it's made up of high-energy neutrons, gamma rays, X-rays, and it takes place in the first minute after the detonation. And so within 1.5 miles of the detonation, we are concerned about the initial radiation. Beyond the 1.5 mile zone, we aren't concerned about this, but of course we don't know where the bomb's going to land. So we want to protect ourselves in this eventuality. The initial radiation is very penetrating, and the entrances must be configured so that they're as small as possible. We recommend 36 inches, even 30 inches would be better. And when we get into our shelters, we fill one of the horizontal runs with the rice and all of the shielding, and the other horizontal run has been filled previously with whatever storage that we can put in there, heavy storage. Neutrons are attenuated by lighter elements, hydrogen, for instance, and so we fill them with water, or we fill them with rice or other things that have hydrogen. The 8-foot cover provides good shielding from the initial and the residual radiation both. However, the entrances do allow quite a bit of this neutron radiation to enter. Now, when we get into our shelter, like I said previously, we have the one entrance has been filled, but the other entrance we throw the rice in as quickly as we can put it in. Then if we have a latecomer, this poses somewhat of a problem. Do you let the latecomer in and you take all the shielding out and expose yourself to a possible blast, or do you just leave them outside? So we thought about this problem, and there are a number of people that share shelters in our area, and so we haven't done this yet, but what our new shelter design will be. Instead of coming down vertically and then coming in horizontally, we make an inverted T so that we have about 8 feet on the dead end side, and then we enter into our shelter on the longer side. And we had our fabricator design a little trolley, and you can see, some of you maybe can you see the little trolley up here? Paul, would you kind of show how that works? Then in this 8-foot side, we would put 2 55-gallon drums of water. Then as we come down the shelter, we'd pull that trolley behind us so that these 2 55-gallon drums shield us from the initial radiation. And we'd probably throw in a few rice bags as well, because neutrons are attenuated by the water, but that kind of slows them only enough to turn them into gamma, and there is some gamma. Now when the latecomers arrive, we can push that trolley back into the 8-foot portion over here and then let them in and then pull it right back. So it would increase or decrease the time that we were vulnerable in that shelter. Let's see, I think, Paul, are you going to talk about furniture? Okay.
I don't have a trolley at my shelter, so don't be late. It's been recommended by the experts that soft furniture for your hammocks and chairs be used. Nylon pack cloth seems to be the preferred material because it's very strong and relatively cheap. And hard furniture should be held to a minimum. I have some hard furniture in mine, but it's on sturdy hinges, and they are maintained in a folded up condition, so they're out of the way and they're not a protruding hazard during a period of risk. Also, for those of you who are going to store your water in large drums, which is very popular, you have to arrange for some restraining device for these barrels so that the barrels are not tossed around inside the shelter during blast to crush some of the occupants of the shelter. When you're putting these steel eyes in your corrugated steel shelter, you have to remember that once you've installed the shelter, you can't put any more steel eyes in there. So you've got to do all of your steel eyes before burial, and the preferred method is to drill a hole through the hull and use 2 heavy washers on the outside of the hull, coat the bolt with some ATV silicone adhesive, and run the nut down on the eye bolt from the outside, and we have found that makes a very satisfactory, watertight, long-term arrangement. The last shelter we installed, we had 3 guys working on a Saturday morning, and we were all through putting eyes in about 2 hours. It goes very quickly once you get a system down, and requires a very minimum of hand tools. As far as the floor is concerned, let me back up to the unistrut. So some individuals have successfully used unistrut, which is used widely by electricians for running various appliances and things around in industrial applications. If any of you don't know what unistrut is, please get a hold of me afterwards, but it's basically a continuous run of like a C channel material, and you bolt this upside down with the opening facing downward on the ceiling, and you can run several ribs of this unistrut down your ceiling so you can attach an eye bolt virtually anywhere you like after the shelter is installed. It is kind of expensive though. You want to avoid welding any attachments to the shelter hull because of the galvanized coating is burned away on the inside and the outside, on the other side of the hull surface, and so you're going to have a corrosion problem there eventually. In an 8-foot diameter shelter, the common floor width is about 5 foot 3 inches, and you have about 12 inches clearance underneath the floor for storage of miscellaneous items. Some of the 9 and 10 foot diameter shelters are putting their floors in much higher, giving them up to a 3 feet storage space under the floor. And while that restricts the headrooms above somewhat, it allows you to take full advantage of the full diameter of the shelter hull, so you can move your water barrels and other things against the wall and get maximum use of the floor area. Most floors have been constructed from 3/4 inch thick plywood, which is glued and screwed together in 2 layers, so you wind up with about 1.5 inch thick floor, and with a 5 foot wide floor, that gives you a real sturdy floor, but yet it has a kind of a springy feel to it in the center of the floor. So if you were to be walking on the floor during a blast event, you would be less apt to suffer crushing injuries to the feet. So they recommend a flexible floor if possible. Now, if you're going to store heavy items such as your water barrels on a certain segment of your floor, you'd better go ahead and plan on reinforcing that with a lot of 2x4s to stand up under the weight of the water barrels. The average water barrel runs about 500 pounds, and so if you have 4, 5, 6, or 7 of these stacked on one section of your floor is not going to appreciate that unless you plan for that extra weight. Please pay careful consideration to your backfill and the location of your shelter. Now, the last shelter we installed here last month was really the tidiest installation we've done so far. The gentleman invited me over to his home to pick the best location for his new shelter, and I went in his backyard, and it was very, very tiny. It was like 15 feet across at the back. It went all the way around the back of the house. And the easements on both sides of the house were developed, and there was hardly any room to get any equipment or materials in the backyard. So we went out in the front yard, and he had a beautiful manicured front lawn, very very lovely landscaping. And I thought, gee, it would be kind of a crime, to chew up this man's yard. And I looked over at his driveway, and I noticed that his driveway had a couple of cracks in it. And I said, I think you need a new driveway. So we got the tape measure out and measured, and sure enough, we had 40 feet of driveway there. And he agreed that the driveway looked kind of shabby. And so with a little figuring, we decided that we would go ahead and put the entrance inside the garage. So we had a concrete cutter come out and saw the floor out about 10 feet square, and ran his entrance right up into the garage. He parks his car on top of the hatch. We gotta talk to him about EMP. You know, maybe his car won't start and he can't get his hatch open. But anyway, we always recommend that people get a building permit. Be up front, work with the local authorities, be above board, and they'll usually work with you pretty well. But a lot of people don't like to get a building permit. And so we hurried the first day. The first morning, in an hour, the driveway was gone, and we had the hole dug. It was an 18-foot deep hole because it was a 9-foot diameter shelter. And so the track hoe dug the hole in about 6 hours. And at the end of the first day, we had the hull installed and partially backfilled. Interesting, during the installation, one of the neighbors came running over and looked into this huge hole with this silver thing in it and said, "What is it?" And we said, "It's a root cellar." "Oh, okay." And she ran across the street and we never heard another word from him. So, anyway, early the next morning we put the entryway on and we put the air pipes in, and we backfilled and compacted the rest of the way with regular fill. And at the end of the second day, when I went home about 5 o'clock, they were just dumping the top layer of sewer rock on the dirt there to get ready to pour the driveway. And I would imagine that anywhere from about 3/4 of the way through the project, if a building inspector had happened by, he could have said, "I'm just replacing my driveway." And no one would have been the wiser, and that looked like that was what we were doing. And it worked out really well. Most of the people in the room probably got to see that shelter if you went on the shelter tour. It was a very lovely installation. We kind of discourage entrances from the basement of your home because should your house be knocked down and burned, you would have a risk of getting carbon monoxide gas seeping into your shelter, and it doesn't take a whole lot of that to cause problems. There are any number of unique and interesting designs that you can come up with on your shelter. We ask that you do a little consulting first with somebody who's familiar with radiation shielding before you finalize your plans. Some people's modifications have seriously compromised the ability of their shelter to protect them from radiation. But we have several people in our area who have linked several tanks together, and I think Willie has 8 tanks now linked together. He keeps adding more tanks every year, and kind of hard to keep up with how many he's got latest. But anyway, please be sure and consult with somebody who's familiar with that before you finally decide to dig, because it's a lot easier to correct it on paper than later on. If you're going to lay 2 tanks together, side by side, you have to remember that at least 1 tank diameter of dirt has to be between the 2 tanks. They have to be 1 tank diameter away from each other to achieve the maximum earth arching effect. Outside entrances are not required for each tank. However, each tank should have at least 1 entrance and 1 exit, allowing for at least 2 ways in or out of every room. We also recommend that if you don't have the room to put 2 full-time hatches in, that you have at least some other method of emergency egress, and we can show you some rather creative ideas we've come up with on that. When you're doing your excavating and your crane work, we ask that you not try to do things on the cheap, and that is use an underrated machine, something that's not really up to the job. We've seen people use very small machines for both excavating and lifting the shelter into the hole. I would try to get a contractor that has a large track hoe, because he can do both jobs. He can both dig the hole and he can safely lift the shelter into the hole, provided that you're using corrugated steel. Now, if you're going to use the gasoline, the old gasoline tank for a shelter, those weigh about 10,000 pounds for a 30-foot shelter, and you're going to have to get a real crane in there, a mobile crane, and believe me, it's well worth the $200 or $300 to have a real crane come in there, because if you have an accident, it's going to be very embarrassing. And I remember when they were doing my shelter, the crane operator picked the tank, and for some reason he swung my shelter completely over my neighbor's house. And let me tell you, that gives you a real dry mouth when you think of all the things that could happen. And of course, you're new in the neighborhood, and it makes a real big impression on your neighbors when you drop a gas tank on their house. For electrical power, we've had real good luck with the deep cycle recreational vehicle batteries. I charge mine about once a month. Some people put their batteries on a full-time trickle charger, so they don't have to mess with that. Many of us store small generators that are portable. You can hold them in your hand. They're very fuel efficient. They run a long time on a gallon of gas. I think mine runs 5.5 hours on a gallon of gas. And I plan to use that to regenerate or reconstitute my batteries after a long period of crisis. And I believe that if the worst happened, there would be adequate sources available in the area for gasoline for some time. We also recommend that you use an energy efficient light bulb in your shelter. Your common brake light bulbs in your automobiles can pull as much as 5 amps. Well, 5 amps per hour on a battery is not going to leave you a lot of time on your battery. So we found some small bulbs that run on 12 volts that have a little reflector base on them, and they draw 170 milliamps, a very small fraction of an amp, and they put out an appreciable amount of light. And if you're interested, the stock number is an RB12, and it's made by Sylvania, and they're readily available. Some of you out there who are a little more familiar with electricity and lighting applications, I'm sure you can find a bulb that's even more efficient than that. Solar panels work well for recharging your batteries. They don't require any fuel, and they're not susceptible to any mechanical problems, and they're quiet. They don't attract any attention. The only thing is you have to store those inside your shelter so that they will not be damaged during any blast. We spoke earlier of the need to tie down your water barrels and other appliances in the shelter so they're not flying around inside the shelter and injuring people. We haven't quite figured out how we're going to tie down the chemical toilet yet. And if anybody has any good ideas, we'll be more than willing to listen to that. We recommend the chemical toilet, such as a marine toilet. They're commonly available with a 5-gallon holding tank, which should be adequate for a family for several days. They appear to be very odor-free and easy to handle. We do not recommend people cutting into sewer lines, and we had an individual in Logan who hooked his shelter to a sewer line, and well, the sewer backed up one day, and now he doesn't recommend that either. Septic tanks are also inappropriate because they seem to fail at about 5 pounds per square inch overpressure, and they wouldn't be very valuable. As I mentioned earlier, we have had a few flooding problems. I know I flooded my shelter when I had a trench dug from my electrical conduit over to the house, and I was pulling wire through there for several days, and I failed to notice that the discharge chute for my gutter system happened to be exactly the same place. And so when it rained really hard, I got all the rain from my roof in my shelter. So you kind of have to use common sense, and you'll avoid flooding problems. Sometimes you'll get water through the entrances, so be sure that when you put your concrete collar around your hatch, to feather the concrete away from the hatch so it'll drain away. We also recommend a good gasket for the door to keep weather out, but more importantly to keep toxic gases and fallout from entering your shelter. Probably the most practical thing that we've done as far as the entrances are concerned on the outside is building a small tough shed or utility shed over the entire hatch assembly, because if you live in a climate where it freezes in the wintertime, you'll discover that when you run out there in the wintertime to get something and you can't lift the hatch open because of all the ice, you're going to think that tough shed's a good idea. I know I've had to use a crowbar on mine a couple of times to get my door open, and so we've solved that problem with the application of a utility shed. We have had a couple of problems of people not using crushed rock in places where they were supposed to. They saved a little bit on gravel, but the entrance settled a little bit beyond where it was supposed to and caused some minor problems. So be sure and get plenty of crushed rock when you're backfilling. Everybody that puts in a shelter wants to do this as discreetly as possible. And I've had several people tell me there's no way that anybody's going to know I'm putting in a shelter. And I look at them and, wonder what they've been thinking. But every neighborhood has an informant. I had one, and everybody I've talked to has had an informant. And that's why we've always recommended, please go, get a building permit up front. It's just better that way. But we did have a clever installation where we were going to do it without a building permit. And the day before we installed it, we had the track operator out there. He was digging this big hole. They had dirt everywhere. And the informant called the city. And the building inspector drove up in his car, and he walked up to the operator, and he said, "What are you building?" And the operator looked down and said, "I don't know, I'm just digging this hole." So the building inspector, he bought that. So he went to the door, and he knocked on the door, and the man's children, being very savvy, they knew what was going on. The building inspector said, what are you guys building out here? And the young man said, "I don't know, you'll have to ask my dad. He's not here right now." So they gave the child his card and left. So the next day, bright and early, there's like 15 people out there with a crane, with the big backup alarm beeping away, and the people running around yelling and throwing cables and whatnot. And we're right in the middle of getting ready to lift this thing and put it in a hole, and a whole carload of building inspectors drives up. Most of them were wearing suits and ties, and we thought, well, we got the big guys down here now. So they all swarmed over to the driveway, and they got a hold of the poor homeowner, and he said, "What the heck are you doing here? What's all this stuff?" And he said, "Well, I'm putting in a root cellar." A root cellar is a very common thing here in this area. And maybe we're going to have to come up with something else, because the building inspector is going to get smart hearing the same thing all the time. But anyway, he said, "Well, did you get a building permit?" And he said, "Well, no, I didn't. I didn't think I needed one." He said, "Well, what made you think that?" He said, "Well, I'm not pouring any footings, so you don't have to inspect any footings." Well, yeah. And he says, "It's not an above-ground structure." Well, yeah. "And it's not intended for human occupancy." Well, that's true. "And there's no plumbing or sanitary or water or electrical connections." And the senior inspector said, "Yeah, I guess so." So they all shook hands, and they got in their car and they drove away. And okay. So anyway, it can be, this activity can be a real adventure, and I've been told that we're a little short on time, so I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Sharon.
In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that nuclear war would be the most horrible thing that ever happened to us, but we believe that nuclear war is survivable, and preparing for this actually has been a lot of fun. It shouldn't be this much fun, I guess. But we have worked hard in our organization, and we hope that you will take advantage of the things that we have learned. If you would like to call us, you're certainly welcome. We do have a video out, and we have a book out, and it shows step by step how to build these shelters. We're concerned about excessive federally funded programs as much as we want a civil defense program in the United States. I don't feel all that bad that we don't have it. It maybe would turn out like Ed York was talking about in Russia, and they would all design the shelters, and we wouldn't like them, and we'd have to pay for them. So I really feel like we need to take the civil defense program upon ourselves, and we need to build our own shelters. We just must not sit around waiting for the government to do this for us. And we thank you for your attendance in Utah. We hope you come again. Thank you.